What would drive a disgraced royal to board a red-eye flight back to the kingdom that rejected him in the dead of night, with no security and no titles left to his name? Let's pause right there, because if that question alone didn't jolt you out of your seat, you're about to be swept into one of the most volatile, historic, and completely unprecedented royal crises of our time. This isn't just another tabloid tantrum. This is not about family feuds or sensational headlines. This is about the collapse of legacy, the cracking of monarchy, and a prince, one born into centuries of privilege, being told he no longer has the right to his name, his honors, or even his past. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And it happened in real time. You may think you know the story, the breakaway Sussexes, the drama of Spare, the Netflix tell-all, the Oprah fallout. But what you haven't heard, what the palace has kept buried in silence and legalese, is how fast, how brutal, and how coordinated the takedown really was. Because while Prince Harry may have thought he left the firm on his own terms, the reality, as we now know, is far more complicated, far more chilling, and far more final. Let's begin with a name you probably haven't heard connected to all this yet. The Queen's private secretary. It wasn't Charles. It wasn't Camilla. It wasn't even William. It was the Queen's shadow man. The one who handled the transition when Elizabeth passed. The one who sat in the same office every day for 30 years, watching generation after generation of royal heirs make the same mistake, believing that titles are eternal. He saw Harry's latest interview. He saw the recent private calls leaked to the press. He heard the murmurs from inside Parliament. And he made a phone call. That phone call, according to two senior sources, set off a chain reaction that even the king himself wasn't fully prepared for. So why now? Why, after years of back-and-forth statements, icy glances at coronations, and millions in Netflix and Spotify fallout, did Buckingham Palace finally decide to act? Why did King Charles agree, without hesitation, to strip his own son of every royal privilege he had left? Why did William go quiet and Camilla step forward? And why, of all people, did Parliament start to get involved? The answers lie in a volatile mix of old grievances, new legal loopholes, global PR chaos, and one miscalculated move by Harry and Meghan that forced the palace's hand in a way no one expected. Before we take you inside that emergency meeting, the one where the strip order was signed and sealed behind four locked doors, you need to understand something most people forget. The monarchy is not just a family. It's an institution, a constitutional machine wrapped in royal tradition. And once a lever is pulled in that machine, it's almost impossible to stop. So when a document marked "Revoke Titles and Privileges" was printed at Clarence House, sealed with the royal arms, and sent by diplomatic courier to Westminster, it meant only one thing. This wasn't symbolic anymore. This was real. Let's break it down. For the past 2 years, there's been increasing pressure from multiple sides to do something about Harry and Meghan's continued use of titles. From MPs claiming it was inappropriate for a non-working royal to profit off his status, to constitutional scholars warning about the dangerous precedent it sets when senior royals operate outside of the UK, while maintaining privileges paid for by the Crown Estate. Add to that the Sussexes' various business ventures, some of which were rumored to be under investigation for trademark violations involving the royal crest, and you begin to see why the palace's patience wore thin. But that still doesn't explain the timing. Why now? Sources point to a combination of three things. An upcoming royal audit revealing millions in unauthorized overseas appearances, a secret recording involving Harry and a controversial U.S. donor, and perhaps most damning of all, a final straw moment between William and Harry that insiders say left the air visibly shaken. We'll get to each of those, but let's rewind a moment to the world outside the palace walls. Because while this royal soap opera played out on global news feeds, something very different was happening among the public. British citizens, already reeling from economic stress, rising energy prices, and calls for transparency, began to ask the one question the monarchy never wants trending. Why are we still funding these people? It wasn't just the Sussexes, but their Netflix show, their Spotify deal, their paid speeches in New York, all while still being called Duke and Duchess? That was a PR nightmare waiting to implode. And implode it did, but not in a press conference. Not in a tabloid exposé. Not even in a leaked memoir. No, this time, the bombshell came from inside the House of Windsor. At exactly 2:14 p.m. last Wednesday, the strip order was finalized. Not leaked. Not discussed. Finalized. A rare emergency session was held inside Clarence House, not Buckingham Palace, to avoid media attention. And those in attendance were required to surrender their mobile phones before entering. Camilla arrived first, followed by William, then the private secretary, and finally, Charles, his face described as ashen and resolved. According to one senior aide, this was not a family meeting. This was constitutional enforcement. It was surgical, but what came next wasn't cold. It was personal. Charles, after reviewing the documents for 10 silent minutes, reportedly looked up and said, "If he wants freedom, we must honor it." Within the hour, the order was signed. No more His Royal Highness. No more Duke of Sussex, pending final parliamentary review. No more military uniforms. No more public funding. No more official protection during UK visits. The man once second in line to the throne, stripped, officially and indefinitely, of all royal honors. Now here's where it gets even more unbelievable. Harry didn't learn of this from his father. Not from a spokesperson. Not even through formal channels. He found out via a leak. A strategic, surgical leak, planted at the exact moment he was scheduled to appear at a public speaking event in California. Multiple cameras caught the moment his phone lit up. His expression changed. His hand shook, and he abruptly canceled his appearance. 3 hours later, Harry was booked on a commercial flight back to London. Not private, not royal, not even first class. Just a hoodie, a baseball cap, and a security downgrade that sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels. But what exactly triggered that emergency return? What was in the document that made him abandon everything, including Meghan? And more importantly, who sent him the warning? Because sources confirm, it wasn't Charles. It wasn't William. And it definitely wasn't Camilla. It was someone Harry never expected to hear from again. A cousin who has remained in the shadows since Meghan's first days in the UK. And what that person told Harry changed everything. Because buried in the strip order was one final clause. A clause that could determine whether Harry ever steps foot in the UK again, as a royal, as a civilian, or something in between. But that clause? We're not there yet. First, we need to go back to the phone call. The one that started it all. The call that came just as the sun was setting over the Pacific. The voice on the other end simply said, "Harry, it's done." And what followed would unravel everything. How do you react when someone tells you, flat out, that everything you once believed was protected is gone? That the bloodline you were born into, the empire that once bent around your every whim, has decided you no longer belong? That your title, the very thing that opened doors, shielded you from chaos, made you who you are, is about to be wiped from the annals of royal history? For Prince Harry, that moment came just as the California sun was melting into the Pacific horizon, casting golden light across the Montecito hills. The sky was calm, the air unusually still, but inside, the Sussex estate was anything but peaceful. His phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time, longer. A FaceTime alert. Not a name he expected to see, not a voice he had heard in over a year. The screen read, "Eugenie, secure line." And that's when everything shifted. Because make no mistake, Princess Eugenie was never just a cousin. She was the only royal who had stood by Harry and Meghan during their most turbulent days. The wedding, the exit, the birth of Archie, the Netflix mess. She had visited them in California, laughed with them over wine, cried with them when the palace froze them out. But she had also distanced herself in recent months. Quietly, carefully. Now, she was calling. Unprompted. Urgently. Harry hesitated before answering. Not out of spite. Out of instinct. He knew something was wrong. The moment he picked up, he saw her face, strained, pale, pressed close to the phone screen like she didn't want to be overheard. Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm people use when they're about to drop a bomb and don't want the other person to panic. "Harry," she said, "I don't have long." There was a pause. "It's done." 2 words. That's all it took. And the air around him changed. The silence outside the window felt heavier. Even the dogs, curled at the edge of the couch, seemed to sense it. Harry blinked. "What's done?" She looked away, as if breaking eye contact made it easier. The order. It's been signed. He didn't speak. They're stripping you. All of it. The words didn't land at first. They hovered. Echoed. He thought maybe he misheard. But then she continued. Faster now, like she knew the call might cut out at any moment. No HRH. No Duke. No military rank. It's real. Charles signed it. Camilla too. William didn't object. There it was. No legalese. No diplomatic buffering. Just raw truth. It hit Harry like a gut punch. Not just the content, but the delivery. That it had come from her, not his father. Not his brother. Not even an official palace contact. He managed a half-breath. Are you sure? Her answer was a bitter nod. It happened this afternoon. Clarence House. Emergency session. Only 4 people in the room. And you found out how. I overheard something I wasn't meant to. I confirmed it. And Harry, they plan to release it next week. Quietly. They'll bury it under some other headline. You'll just be gone. He couldn't move. Gone. Not exiled. Not punished. Not reprimanded. Gone. No press conference. No opportunity to defend himself. No confrontation. Just erasure. Like he had never belonged at all. What about Meg? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Eugenie replied. Her name wasn't mentioned. That said everything, didn't it? Even now, even stripping him, the palace was avoiding her name like poison. Like speaking it might trigger another war they couldn't control. Why now? He finally asked, trying to steady himself. But Eugenie didn't get to answer. A sudden voice in the background, muffled, male, commanding, cut through the call. Eugenie flinched. Her eyes darted sideways. I have to go. Wait. She leaned forward one last time. Whatever you do, don't wait. Get back here. Now. There's something else. Something in the order. And just like that, the screen went black. The call ended. No follow-up. No text. Nothing. Harry sat there frozen, staring at the dark screen, watching his reflection grow clearer as the sun dipped lower. His fingers twitched. His heart pounded. It felt like watching a glass shatter in slow motion, knowing you can't stop the pieces from scattering. And then the emotion hit him like a tidal wave. Not anger. Not yet. Shock. Because deep down, no matter how far he had pulled away, no matter how many interviews or memoirs or Netflix cameras had distanced him from the institution, some small part of him still believed there were boundaries. That there were things they wouldn't do. He was wrong. What would you do in that moment? Call your father? The same man who just signed you away? Text your brother? The one who didn't speak at the coronation? Call your lawyer? Your press team? The American agents who still clung to your royal glow like moths to a flame? Harry did none of that. Instead, he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the sun, now bleeding across the horizon like fire. His reflection on the glass looked unfamiliar. Not a prince. Not a soldier. Just a man. Stripped of everything. He reached for the phone again. Searched his contact list. Scrolled past William, Charles, Kate, until he stopped at one name. Tyler. The man who had helped him escape once before. A friend with access to low-profile travel routes. Discreet. Efficient. Trusted. Because if Eugenie was right, if the order had already been signed, then staying in California was no longer a refuge. It was a vulnerability. A sitting target for headlines, speculation, and global humiliation. And worse, it meant being blindsided again when the story broke. He couldn't let that happen. So he made the call. Told Tyler he needed to be in London within 24 hours. No security detail. No announcement. No chartered jet. Commercial flight. No royal credentials. Cash ticket. And Tyler, without asking for details, simply said, Understood. You'll leave tonight. Harry hung up. Exhaled. Still no tears. Still no rage. Just that deep, hollow ache of knowing that everything he once stood for, everything he fought for in Afghanistan, everything he bled for in the tabloids, everything he thought he preserved by walking away, had just been taken. Not by enemies. Not by strangers. By his own family. Meanwhile, across the ocean in London, palace courtiers were already preparing for the fallout. They knew the leak would come. They knew Harry's reaction would be swift. But what they didn't know, what they hadn't accounted for, was the unexpected player who had just re-entered the game. Because while Harry was booking his flight and Buckingham Palace was locking down its crisis response, someone else was watching this all unfold. Someone with an agenda. Someone with a camera. and someone who had everything to gain by turning this royal reckoning into a global spectacle. But we're not there yet. Because before the footage, before the lawyer at Heathrow, before the Parliament storm, we need to follow Harry. From that call to the gate. Because the next 12 hours would reshape his entire future. What does it look like when a monarchy decides to erase one of its own? Not symbolically, not with vague statements or chilly silences, but officially, deliberately, with signatures, stamps, and full legal backing. It looks like this: a sealed folder, cream parchment, not digital, heavy wax insignia melted precisely in the center. The lion and unicorn of the royal arms curled around a Latin phrase too ancient for most modern courtiers to translate. It arrived just before noon, hand-delivered to Clarence House by a senior courier from the Privy Council office. Not Buckingham Palace, not the Home Office. That choice, Clarence House, was intentional. The king's residence, his private base, his safe ground. Inside that folder was the most controversial royal document since the abdication papers of Edward VIII. And unlike those, this one had been quietly drafted not over months, but days. Now let's rewind. 3 days before Harry received that call from Eugenie, behind tightly shut doors and soundproof walls, the monarch's closest advisors gathered in a discreet meeting room at Clarence House, known only as the Round Library. It isn't actually round. That's part of the irony. But it is remote, removed from the public wing, shielded by 2 checkpoints and accessible only with royal-level clearance. Present at that meeting? King Charles III, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and a name the public almost never hears: Sir Edward Lascelles, the king's private constitutional advisor, a gray-haired enforcer with a memory like a razor and a disdain for drama. In front of them, a draft titled Proposed Amendments to the Titles, Styles, and Privileges of Henry Charles Albert David, formerly His Royal Highness the Duke of Sussex. It didn't mince words. The first line stated, "In the interest of preserving the integrity of the crown and the trust of the British people, it is deemed appropriate to remove the subject's royal titles, privileges, and military honors." No drama, no emotion, just cold, administrative finality. William, they say, didn't speak for nearly the entire first half of the meeting. His face, unreadable. His posture, tight. His eyes, fixed on the table, not on the document. When asked if he had any objections to the proposal, he reportedly said just one thing: "Do what you need to do, but make it clean." Camilla, however, was far more assertive. She'd had enough. Enough of the sniping. Enough of the memoir jabs. Enough of the subtle digs at her role in Diana's story. Enough of Meghan's candlelit whisper diplomacy in American media, hinting at racism and betrayal without ever naming names, but everyone knew who they meant. To Camilla, this was about institution over individual. She was a survivor. And to survive in the royal family, you learned that mercy is a luxury and often a trap. She reportedly told the room, "Every day we wait, the damage compounds. Let him be who he wants to be, but not on our letterhead." And Charles, the monarch who once cradled Harry in his arms at Balmoral, who walked him through the worst days of Diana's death, who cried in private over the rift, he said nothing for the first hour. Just flipped through the draft in silence, until he reached the clause at the end, the clause that would grant Harry a narrow path back to partial status, if certain conditions were met. A lifeline, or a leash. It was Charles who insisted on keeping that clause. Even now, after everything, he couldn't bring himself to shut the door entirely. Not yet. But the rest? He approved, without a blink. The process, legally speaking, wasn't difficult. Most of the powers required already existed within the royal prerogative. The HRH style is granted and can be removed by the sovereign. The Duke of Sussex title, although inherited by letters patent, can be suspended under special circumstances with Privy Council and parliamentary support. What was difficult was the decision to make it binding. Not optional, not performative, not a press statement, but an irreversible legal mechanism that would affect Harry's name, his standing in royal records, his place in the line of succession, symbolically, and his entitlement to taxpayer-funded security during visits to the UK. The strip order included the following: removal of the His Royal Highness style, suspension of the Duke of Sussex title pending parliamentary ratification, revocation of ceremonial military appointments, including Captain General of the Royal Marines, termination of automatic security funding under the sovereign grant for any future UK visits, reclassification in the court circular to private citizen, immediate archival of his page on the official royal family website, and tucked in the very last paragraph, after the legal jargon and citation of previous royal precedents, was the clause Charles had insisted on. A conditional pathway to restoration may be considered should the subject permanently withdraw from all commercial endeavors invoking royal association, issue a formal statement of reparation to the Crown, and consent to a defined period of private service without public remuneration. In short, you can come back if you grovel, vanish, and give up everything you built outside the family. You can imagine how that clause went over with the rest of the room. Sir Edward reportedly called it a dangerous ambiguity. Camilla said it was a sentimental indulgence. William didn't say a word, but his silence said everything. Charles signed anyway. One royal staffer, present during the final minutes, described the atmosphere as tense, surgical, and sad. Once the document was sealed, Camilla rose first. She placed her signature below Charles's and added a notation, with counsel and full support. William stood next. Didn't sign. Just nodded once and walked out. Sir Edward stamped the envelope. The courier was summoned, and at 12:38 p.m., the strip order left Clarence House, headed for the Privy Council. There was no leak, no media sniff. Not yet. Everything was coordinated to remain locked down for exactly 6 days. On the 7th, the palace planned to release a brief statement. At the request of the sovereign and with the advice of His Majesty's government, changes to the royal titles and styles of the Duke of Sussex have been approved. Dry, clinical, absolute. But the plan hit a snag. Not because of Harry, because of someone inside the palace. An insider. Someone loyal once, now wavering. Someone who still believed the family could be saved from itself. That person picked up the phone, called Eugenie, told her where to look, what to listen for. And that's how Harry learned about it before the world did. That's why he left California in such a rush. Not to fight it, but to read it, to hold it in his hands, to understand if it was real. Because there's something different about reading it in the press versus seeing your own name listed on an official royal document, stripped and demoted in ink. And while all this was unfolding inside gilded London walls, across the Atlantic, Harry's flight had just taken off from LAX. No press. No bodyguards. No priority boarding. No fanfare. He sat in a hoodie near the back of the plane, head low, one hand gripping the armrest, the other holding the phone, staring at the last message from Eugenie. For words. Brace yourself. It's worse. What could be worse? He was about to find out. Because back in London, after the courier handed over the sealed order, another delivery was being prepared. This one for Harry directly. A confidential packet, couriered to Heathrow. Waiting with a solicitor the moment he stepped off the plane. And inside that packet, a personal letter from Charles. Not from the king, from the father. And what that letter contained would shatter everything. What happens when the woman once branded the other woman becomes the monarchy's iron hand? Not the soft-spoken consort, not the quiet support behind the throne, but the one who steps forward when no one else will, and signs the name that strips a prince of his birthright. Because make no mistake, the moment Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Camilla, placed her signature below the king's on the strip order, the tone shifted permanently. From a cautious monarchy to a decisive regime. Let's go back to that room. The so-called round library. For people, one document, and the power of a single signature to rewrite royal history. After Charles had read the strip order, slowly, meticulously, as if absorbing not just the words but the weight of what it represented. He placed the pen on the table. Everyone in the room paused. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was blood, royal blood, and the next person to act was her. Queen Camilla, poised, calm, expression unreadable, reached for the pen. No hesitation, no flinch, no whisper of second-guessing. She signed with a slow, elegant flourish. Her hand steady, her gaze locked forward. And in that moment, everyone else in the room knew. This wasn't Charles's idea alone. This was Camilla's execution. Now let's be honest. Camilla's rise to the top of the royal ladder has always been a paradox. vilified in the 1990s, humanized in the 2000s, slowly rehabilitated by press campaigns, quiet charity work, and a relentless palace strategy to reposition her not just as Charles's wife, but as the steadying force behind a modern monarchy. And it worked. Sort of. But behind the scenes, Camilla was far more than a ceremonial figurehead. She wasn't just hosting literary luncheons and advocating for domestic violence charities. She was watching, listening, calculating, and most importantly, she understood what Charles often couldn't bring himself to do: draw hard lines, especially when it came to Harry. You see, Camilla's animosity toward Prince Harry didn't ignite with Meghan. It began years earlier, long before Oprah, before the Netflix deal, even before Spare. It started with Diana. Because for all the effort Charles and Camilla made to clean up their legacy, to rehabilitate their image after the tragedy of the 90s, it was Harry, young, fiery, emotional Harry, who refused to play along. He didn't fake smiles. He didn't embrace her for cameras. He made no secret of his complicated feelings toward the woman he saw as the root of his mother's pain. And in private? The stories whispered by insiders painted a picture of icy interactions, passive-aggressive comments, and occasional bursts of rage. One source, who worked briefly at Clarence's house during Harry's late teens, once claimed he never shouted at her. But the coldness was worse. He'd walk past her in silence, like she was a ghost. Fast forward 2 decades. And now, Camilla holds the pen. She isn't a ghost anymore. She's queen. And that moment, signing the strip order, was her final answer. So what drove her to take the lead? Why not let Charles carry the burden? Simple. Camilla understood something vital. That indecision is the monarchy's greatest weakness. And Harry, with his memoirs, interviews, and lucrative anti-institutional branding, had exposed that weakness to the world. With every press appearance, every carefully worded jab, every silence that let others speculate, he chipped away at the mystique the monarchy so desperately needs to survive. And Camilla? She had spent too long rebuilding the crown's image to let it be undone by one man's wounded ego, no matter how justified. But there was something else, too. Something deeper. Something personal. The chapter in Spare. Yes, that chapter. The one where Harry described her as dangerous. A schemer. A manipulator who orchestrated favorable press by sacrificing others, including him, on the altar of reputation. He didn't just criticize her. He exposed her strategy. And Camilla never forgot it. Insiders say that when early drafts of Spare were leaked internally, and she read the passages about herself, her reaction was chillingly composed. She laughed, said one source. Then she said, "He's still the little boy who blames shadows. Let him have his tantrum. When he's finished, we'll tidy up." Well, this was the tidy up. And what made it even more brutal? The precision. Camilla didn't just sign the order. She directed the response strategy. When should the news break? How long should the palace wait before confirming? Who should carry the official statement? Clarence's house or Kensington? She even oversaw the subtle updates to the royal family website, ensuring Harry's page was quietly archived at 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, when most media outlets were asleep. Why? Because Camilla knows timing is power. And in the digital age, controlling when people find out is just as important as what they find out. But it doesn't stop there. Camilla also made one very pointed request, that Harry be notified through official legal channels, not family. No call, no email, no fatherly outreach. Just a lawyer, a packet, and a formal letter stating the revocation of titles and privileges. Let that sink in. She didn't want emotion. She wanted process. Because to Camilla, this wasn't about family anymore. It was about safeguarding the crown. And if that meant becoming the villain in Harry's next memoir, so be it. Because for Camilla, being disliked is nothing new. She's been the scapegoat, the villain, the homewrecker, the second choice, and she survived all of it. So now, she plays to win. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of the signing, something strange happened. Once the courier had left, once William had gone, once Sir Edward had exited to prep for the Privy Council, Camilla reportedly stayed behind with Charles. She poured him tea, and for a few minutes, they sat in silence. Then Charles asked, very softly, "Do you think he'll hate me forever?" Camilla didn't look up from her cup. She said, "Perhaps. But he hated us anyway. At least now it's done. That's the part no one sees." The paradox of monarchy, that even the most ruthless acts are often done with trembling hands. But Camilla's hands did not tremble. And while the media continues to speculate who truly pushed this process forward, Charles, William, Parliament, the truth is far simpler. It was Camilla. And she did it calmly, deliberately, like a woman finally claiming her place not just in Charles's life, but in the machinery of the monarchy itself. But here's where the story turns again. Because while Camilla was executing the final step, and Harry was flying over the Atlantic unaware, another voice entered the fray, one that hadn't been heard publicly in over 2 years. And when she did speak, it wasn't through statements or interviews. It was in the form of a leaked recording, a meeting, a conversation, a confrontation between two brothers, one a future king, the other now a man without titles. But what exactly did William say? And why did he choose not to stop the strip order? The answer is more complicated than anyone realized, and it starts with silence. Sometimes silence is more powerful than 1,000 words, especially when it comes from a future king. Prince William didn't shout. He didn't object. He didn't storm out of the room or beg for reconsideration. He simply stayed silent. And that silence, in the room where the strip order was signed, spoke volumes. It was a silence years in the making, a silence heavy with betrayal, grief, calculation, and something deeper than rage. It was final. So let's step into that moment. Charles had just read the final clause. Camilla had already signed it. The courier stood waiting outside, prepared to deliver the order to the Privy Council. Sir Edward Lascelles, the king's constitutional advisor, looked at William, expression unreadable, expecting perhaps a word, a nod, a signal of dissent. But William just sat there, still, quiet, eyes low. And then, without looking up, he reportedly said, "Do what you have to do." Those 7 words sealed the deal. Because despite not lifting a pen, Prince William's silence was the final signature. Now here's the question. Why didn't he fight for his brother? They were the royal duo, the boys who walked behind Diana's coffin, the brothers who made dirty jokes at military banquets and held each other up when the press circled like vultures. What happened to that bond? The short answer? It was broken, slowly, quietly, and then, all at once. Let's rewind a bit, to the moment the cracks began. Some say it was Meghan. Some say it was the wedding and the infamous bridesmaid dress fight. Others claim it was the Africa tour when Harry and Meghan dazzled press and public while William and Kate stayed behind, quietly overshadowed. But insiders say the rot started earlier. With trust, William, ever the statesman, believed in the invisible contract. Protect the crown, and it protects you. Don't rock the boat. Keep calm, carry on. Build goodwill, shake hands, smile, and wait your turn. Harry, on the other hand, grew increasingly allergic to that contract. He wanted freedom, emotion, honesty, and, increasingly, control. So when Harry began leaking frustrations to friendly journalists, when he let interviews air unchecked, when he included shocking family details in his memoir and still insisted it was his truth, William reached a breaking point. He didn't explode. He didn't punch walls. He simply began withdrawing, first from calls, then from family group chats, then from joint royal initiatives, eventually from all communication entirely. And when Spare dropped, that was the point of no return. Because while the world was busy reacting to the shocking passages, the frostbitten parts, the Taliban numbers, the dog bowl fight, one quote hit William harder than all the others combined. It was this. He'd told me to pretend we didn't know each other in school. Pretend we weren't brothers. I obeyed. That quote, and the vulnerability behind it, infuriated William. Not because it wasn't true, but because Harry weaponized their childhood, their pain, their deepest insecurities, and turned them into paperback spectacle. William reportedly told a close friend, he's not writing a memoir. He's writing a funeral speech for the family name. So when the strip order was proposed, William didn't need to say yes. His silence was the yes. But there's another layer here, one the public rarely sees. William wasn't just angry. He was exhausted. Exhausted from shielding the crown from his brother's chaos. Exhausted from watching his father age under stress. Exhausted from trying, and failing, to reason with someone who didn't want a resolution, only vindication. Insiders say William made one last attempt to speak with Harry in private, months before the strip order. He asked for a confidential meeting. No staff, no press, no spouses. Harry declined, said he needed everything on the record. That was the end. So when the time came to formally sever ties, to remove titles, funding, military rank, William offered no protest. And not because he didn't care, but because he no longer believed reconciliation was possible. You might ask, isn't that heartless? Couldn't he have fought for his brother? Maybe. But from William's perspective, the strip order wasn't an act of vengeance. It was containment. And there's one more thing you need to know. A secret clause in the strip order, one only 4 people saw in the room that day, hinted at a future problem, not Harry's potential return. Meghan's use of the Duchess title in upcoming media projects. Apparently, there had been legal discussions behind closed doors about future Netflix documentaries, books, and even fictional series referencing the title Duchess of Sussex. William had flagged this months earlier, and when he brought it up again during the strip order discussions, he asked just one question. Are we prepared to fight this in American courts? Charles hesitated. Camilla said yes. William said nothing more. But the message was clear. This wasn't just about removing Harry from the royal ledger. It was about fortifying the crown for what might come next. Because with Harry out, truly out, the next battleground would be narrative. And William was done playing defense. Now let's shift to the private aftermath. Because while the order was being processed, while Charles retreated to his study and Camilla drafted messaging strategies, William did something unexpected. He left. No press. No motorcade. No aides. He slipped out of Clarence House and walked through the back gardens, out into London's grey afternoon drizzle, and disappeared for nearly 3 hours. No one knew where he went. Until the next morning, when a grainy photo appeared on social media, posted anonymously. It showed William standing alone on a bridge overlooking the Thames, in a baseball cap and jacket, phone in hand. One commenter wrote, "Didn't realize the Prince of Wales got rained on just like the rest of us." The truth? That night, William called someone he hadn't spoken to in over a year. Lady Sarah Chatto, Princess Margaret's daughter, one of the few royals trusted by both factions. And what he reportedly said to her says everything about his mindset. "I didn't stop it. I couldn't." To which Lady Sarah replied, "Maybe he gave you no choice." And here's the twist. The following day, William sent a single-sentence email to Charles. It read, "Let him read it before the press does." And that is why Harry received the document early. A small mercy, a last gesture, not reconciliation, just dignity. But the rest? The erasure, the title removal, the public demotion? That train had already left the station, and William didn't try to stop it, because in his mind, Harry already had. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because as Harry's flight descended toward Heathrow, there was someone waiting for him at the gate. Not a father, not a brother, but a lawyer, holding the document, and a personal letter from the king. And inside that letter was a final offer, one that would tear him apart. When does a royal scandal stop being a family matter and become a constitutional emergency? When Parliament steps in. Because while the monarchy may operate behind closed palace doors, insulated by centuries of tradition and gilded protocols, it still depends on one essential thing: public consent. And once that consent begins to erode, the elected government, whether it wants to or not, starts paying very, very close attention. That's exactly what happened in the days leading up to the strip order. Long before the royal pens hit parchment. Long before Queen Camilla gave her silent nod. Even before Prince William offered his cold, loaded silence, whispers had already started circulating through the corridors of Westminster. Whispers that turned into murmurs. Murmurs that turned into memos. And those memos triggered the most politically sensitive royal meeting since the death of Princess Diana. Let's peel back the curtain. 3 weeks before the emergency signing at Clarence House, the Home Secretary received a classified intelligence brief from MI5 regarding several ongoing soft threats to the royal family, not external, but internal. Not terrorism, not cyber breaches, reputational damage. And the names at the center of that report? Harry and Meghan. The dossier outlined how several upcoming media appearances by the Sussexes, particularly one rumored Apple TV Plus special and a soon-to-be-released memoir by Meghan herself, contained language and allegations that, if aired while Harry retained his royal titles, could put the crown in direct contradiction with parliamentary standards on neutrality. Translation: the monarchy was heading toward a constitutional collision course. It wasn't just about gossip anymore. It was about the optics of a Duke of Sussex, legally and publicly connected to the sovereign, profiting off accusations against British institutions while receiving global security privileges. That combination, especially in the post-Brexit era of heightened nationalist sentiment, was politically radioactive. The tipping point? A leaked internal memo from the Treasury surfaced, showing that during Harry and Meghan's last UK visit, their security detail, under special royal designation, had cost over £288,000 for just 48 hours. Add to that the public mood. Rising inflation, record NHS wait times, and millions of citizens demanding more transparency about where their taxes were going. So when backbench MP Eleanor Grimshaw stood up during Prime Minister's questions and asked, point-blank, "Why are we funding royal protections for a man who's not serving the crown, but suing it from California?" The chamber didn't laugh. They cheered. Even the Prime Minister looked caught off guard. And just like that, the floodgates opened. The Sovereign Grant Committee, usually a quiet, rubber-stamp body that reviews royal finances, suddenly demanded a closed-door session with Buckingham Palace liaisons. What they received was a confidential report confirming that, yes, Harry still retained several privileges under the umbrella of his ducal status, including diplomatic support when traveling abroad and access to certain heritage properties under the Duchy of Cornwall. That report leaked, and the backlash was swift. Op-eds exploded. One headline from the Times read, "Time to cut him loose." A poll from YouGov showed that 71% of Britons believed Prince Harry should have his titles formally removed. And behind the scenes, MPs were circulating a draft private member's bill titled the Titles Clarification Act 2025. The bill proposed a mechanism for the revocation of royal peerages granted by the Crown through parliamentary vote, should the individual in question demonstrate actions in contradiction to the values, duties, or dignities of the realm. It was legal dynamite, because for centuries, royal titles existed outside the grasp of elected bodies. They were bestowed and removed by sovereign fiat alone. But now Parliament was drawing a line in the sand, not because they hated Harry, not because they loved the monarchy, but because the institution was starting to look weak. And that is political death. So what did the palace do? They acted fast. The Queen's private secretary initiated contact with the cabinet secretary. A brief meeting was held between the Lord Chamberlain and two senior ministers. And that's when it became clear. If the palace didn't act swiftly to strip Harry's remaining titles and privileges themselves, Parliament would do it for them. And if that happened, it would set a catastrophic precedent, one where the government could intervene directly in royal affairs. The monarchy would survive, but it would be wounded. Its sovereignty, its ability to self-govern, would be permanently undermined. Charles couldn't allow that, so the strip order was born. What makes this even more fascinating? The wording of the order itself was subtly designed to preempt Parliament's potential involvement. It stated, in meticulous legal language, that the removal of styles and privileges was being done with consideration to the evolving expectations of public service and at the direction of the sovereign, in consultation with appropriate constitutional advisors and parliamentary liaisons. That phrase, parliamentary liaisons, was key. It allowed the palace to say, "Look, we handled it. No need to intervene." But it didn't stop the questions. Inside the House of Lords, peers debated whether additional reforms should be considered for all non-working royals. The House of Commons established a subcommittee to review taxpayer expenditures related to international royal engagements. And several vocal MPs began demanding that Meghan Markle's usage of the Duchess title in American media be officially challenged, even if it required cooperation with U.S. intellectual property law. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Oliver Manford, usually a staunch royalist, held a press conference where he uttered a sentence no British PM had dared say in over 100 years. The titles held by members of the royal family are privileges, not entitlements. The monarchy heard that loud and clear. And Harry? He hadn't even landed yet. He was still somewhere over the Atlantic when these meetings were happening, oblivious to the fact that his fate had become a bipartisan issue of national interest. By the time his plane touched down at Heathrow, the strip order had already been sent to the Royal Archives. Parliament had been quietly notified. Media outlets had prepared embargoed headlines. And inside a black car waiting at Terminal 5 was a solicitor holding a leather-bound folder and a sealed envelope marked "Eyes Only, HM the King's personal correspondence." But it wasn't just a letter. Inside the folder was a full copy of the strip order, and the solicitor was under strict instructions to read aloud a specific section, Clause 14b, in the event that Harry refused to open the document himself. Clause 14b read, "The subject shall be granted one opportunity to respond prior to public announcement, not for negotiation, but for record." That was it. One chance. No appeals. No PR counterspin. No legal challenges. Just a single opportunity to read the decision and say whatever he needed to say. Privately. Formally. But as Harry emerged from the plane, hoodie up, duffel bag in hand, he saw the solicitor and instantly knew. Not because of the man's face, but because of what he was holding. The folder. And the letter. The letter from his father. The letter that would offer one final choice. And what Harry did next would stun even the palace. What happens in a palace may cause scandal, but what happens in Montecito can start a firestorm. Because the moment the strip order left the walls of Clarence House and raced through Westminster, the aftershocks weren't felt first in London. They were felt across the Atlantic. In a $14 million estate nestled in the Santa Barbara Hills, where lavender grows in manicured rows and glassy windows overlook an ocean that now offered no peace. That's where Meghan Markle stood when her world began to implode. It started, fittingly, with a headline. Not from The Sun, or The Mirror, or the usual royal rags, but from Variety. A leaked exclusive, not fully sourced, not entirely confirmed, but ominously direct. Breaking. Royal sources confirm palace considering full title revocation for Duke of Sussex. Within minutes, it was trending on X. Wait, they can actually do that, one user wrote. Others replied with screenshots of old interviews. Oprah clips, book quotes, TikToks dissecting Spare in real time. But Meghan? She wasn't scrolling. She was screaming. According to two Montecito neighbors who later spoke under anonymity, the noise began around 7:40 a.m. local time. Raised voices, then a slammed door, then a glass shatter, and then silence. You see, Meghan had spent years carefully crafting a brand, not just as an actress, not just as a duchess, but as a global figure, a voice for modern womanhood, a survivor, a fighter, a force, and at the core of that brand, the nucleus around which every deal, every speech, every headline orbited, was that title, Duchess of Sussex. She may not have used Her Royal Highness, and she may have declared she was free of the institution. But the power of the title lingered. It was the gatekeeper, the differentiator, the spark. Strip that away, and you're just Meghan again. And for her, that wasn't enough. So when the news broke that not only was Harry being formally stripped, but that Parliament was discussing legislation that could eventually challenge her use of the Duchess title abroad, panic set in. Inside that Montecito home. The very one featured in glamorous magazine spreads, where rescue chickens clucked in quaint baskets and curated candles glowed in background shots. Phones began ringing off the hook. The publicist, the Netflix team, the trademark lawyer, the agent at WME. Everyone wanted answers. And Meghan? She wanted control. She began pacing, according to one insider, a manic, looping track around the house, kitchen, foyer, veranda, back to kitchen. She demanded updates, demanded legal recourse, demanded an immediate rebuttal. She even called the Sussex's primary PR strategist, waking her up with one line. Tell them we will sue. But sue who exactly? The palace? The government? The people? That was the problem. This wasn't a tabloid scandal. It wasn't a rogue story they could rebut with a podcast episode or a glossy tell-all. This was structural, legal, official, and worst of all, final. And then the real crisis hit. A second headline dropped. Confirmed. Strip order signed by King Charles. Harry to lose titles and privileges. This one came from the Times. No leaks. No rumors. Just fact. And that was when the calls stopped. Not because things were handled, but because the game had changed. One insider, close to Meghan's entertainment team, described it this way. She walked into the room like she was preparing for war. She said, "This is a coordinated takedown. Don't let them control the story." And for a moment, a brief, flickering moment, her team believed they could spin it. That Harry was being targeted. That this was revenge for speaking out. That this was proof the monarchy couldn't handle modern voices. But the silence from London was deafening. No outrage. No press flurry. No leaks. Just the strip order. Published. Confirmed. And legally binding. That's when the shift began. And Meghan, always quick to read the winds of power, knew it. She called Harry. He didn't answer. Because at that very moment, he was stepping off a plane and being handed a letter from his father. That silence, too, spoke volumes. Now here's what no one in the media reported. That morning, an emergency Zoom call was held between Meghan, her attorney, and a senior executive from one of her upcoming media projects, a scripted drama tied to her life story and, crucially, her Duchess identity. The executive asked one simple question. If the palace removes your title, how do we market this? And Meghan? She froze. That's when the panic turned to something else. Desperation. You see, Montecito was more than a sanctuary. It was a launchpad. Every detail, from the lush chicken coop to the minimalist decor to the hand-picked floral arrangements, had been curated for brand synergy. And now, that brand had a hole at its center. A duchess with no dukedom. A royal with no rank. The gravity of it hit hard. A deal with a major podcast platform. Paused indefinitely. An initiative with a global fashion house, suddenly under review. And perhaps most ironic of all, an upcoming children's book titled The Little Prince Who Found His Voice, scheduled to be published under her royal title. That book? Pulled. Indefinitely. Because legal departments across the industry were now asking the same question. If the titles are stripped, do we owe damages for marketing under false pretenses? The panic turned cold. And that's when Meghan did something she hadn't done in nearly 6 months. She called her mother. Doria answered on the second ring. And what Meghan said, quietly, was, "It's over." But Doria, calm as ever, replied with something surprising. "No, baby. This is just the chapter you didn't want to write." And Meghan paused. That's the moment insiders say she changed tone. She stopped screaming. She started strategizing. Within hours, new instructions were sent to her legal team. Domain names were quietly purchased. Several archived interviews were edited, scrubbing Duchess of Sussex in favor of Meghan Markle. And a fresh press pitch was drafted. Title: Meghan Markle, Reclaiming Her Name. A rebrand was in motion. But it wasn't just a pivot. It was a warning. Because Meghan wasn't planning to disappear. She was planning a counterstrike. But that is another storm. Back in Montecito, the final twist came late in the evening, when a staffer, exhausted from the chaos, handed Meghan a sealed envelope. Hand-delivered. No return address. Inside, a single page. Royal letterhead. It wasn't from Charles, or William, or even Camilla. It was from Princess Eugenie. It read, "He knows now. Please, don't make it worse." And Meghan? She crumpled the note, stared out the window, and whispered, "They just made it worse." What does it look like when a prince flees his castle, not in triumph, but in disgrace? No entourage, no royal jet, no rows of press photographers waiting on the tarmac to catch the glint of military medals or polished Oxfords. Just a man in a hoodie, hunched over at Gate 43B at LAX, boarding a commercial flight to London with nothing but a worn leather duffel and a security downgrade that spoke louder than any press release ever could. Prince Harry didn't fly home. He returned under erasure. And the way it happened is nothing short of cinematic. Let's go back to the moment he stepped through the departure terminal. The automatic doors hissed open behind him, locking out the California sun. Ahead of him, cool, humming airport lights. No red carpet. No military escort. Just a smattering of bleary-eyed travelers, scrolling phones and sipping burnt coffee. Not one of them recognized him at first. That's how far he had fallen. Or perhaps, how far he had willingly jumped. His face was mostly hidden under a low-drawn cap. His passport, for the first time in years, was swiped like any civilian's. No diplomatic clearance. No expedited queue. The airline? British Airways. The seat? 31A. Economy Plus. No lie-flat bed. No champagne tray. No cabin curtain. Now why would a man born into luxury, with decades of first-class, royal air corridors at his disposal, choose this? Because when the strip order was confirmed, Harry knew. This wasn't just a headline. It was a reckoning. And if he came back in a private jet with security vehicles lined up on the Heathrow runway, the optics would be catastrophic. Every paper in Britain would have torn him to shreds by sunrise. Prince stripped, still flies private. The headlines would write themselves. So instead, he booked under the name H.C. Davis, a scrambled version of his initials. And he boarded like any other man facing public humiliation. Quietly. But even at 30,000 feet, there was no peace. Because the document, the one handed to him before he boarded, wasn't just a letter from his father. It was the official packet. Stamped, numbered, watermarked. Inside, the full strip order, every clause and subclause, down to the legalese that reclassified him in the court circular as non-active royal, removed from style. And then, the letter, from Charles, written in his own hand. That fact alone stopped Harry cold. He hadn't seen his father's handwriting since the day after Archie's birth. Most communication had come through aides, press statements, or icy silence. But this was personal. He unfolded the page. It read, "My dear son, you may already know the decision made. I won't repeat the contents here. They speak for themselves. This was not done lightly, nor with joy. It was done out of necessity. For the crown, yes, but also for you. You wanted freedom. I believe, perhaps too late, that we have now given it to you. What you do with that freedom is up to you. I do not love you less, but I cannot shield you anymore. Come to Clarence House. One final meeting. No staff. Just us. Your father." See, Harry read it once, then twice, and for a moment, just a flicker, his eyes watered. Not because of the pain, because of the finality. This was his father, not as monarch, not as king, but as the man who had once held him in Balmoral's gardens and read him bedtime stories while Diana flitted between engagements. This was the last olive branch. And even now, even after the titles, the security, the erasure, it came not as a command, but an invitation. But there was something else in the envelope. A separate, smaller slip of paper. Typed, not handwritten. It was from the Lord Chamberlain's office. And it listed, line by line, the privileges that would be revoked within 48 hours. Royal Lodge access, terminated. Official website profile, archived. Public funding for travel to UK events, ceased. Ceremonial uniforms for remembrance and trooping, revoked. Patronages, placed under review. Military insignia display in official settings, forbidden. Harry read it like a death certificate. Each line another incision, another severed link. Somewhere behind him, a baby began to cry. The plane shuddered. The flight attendants murmured about mild turbulence. Harry sat still, frozen. You might think that in this moment, anger would surge. But what he felt was worse. Emptiness. A strange numbness that began at the fingertips and crept toward his throat. His breathing changed. He leaned his head against the plastic wall of the plane, eyes closed, willing sleep to come. It didn't. What had come was memory. Of medals pinned by his grandmother. Of standing in full uniform beside William at a Sandhurst ceremony. Of Diana, standing behind a camera on a long-forgotten summer afternoon, saying "my soldier boys" as the wind ruffled their hair. Gone. All of it. He landed at Heathrow at 9:52 a.m. local time. No security escort met him. Instead, a mid-level solicitor stood holding a sign with 3 letters. HCD. Harry walked past it at first, out of instinct. Then stopped. Turned. The solicitor stepped forward. "I have a car waiting, sir. And a document to confirm." "Who sent you?" "Clarence House. And the Privy Council office." Harry nodded. No argument. No scene. He got in the car. But instead of being driven straight to Clarence House, the car detoured, just slightly, to a secured private conference room in a nearby legal building off High Holborn. Inside, waiting under lock and key, was the second copy of the strip order. This one for signing. Harry wasn't required to sign it, legally. But the palace had offered him the opportunity to acknowledge receipt and recognition. In other words, a final gesture of respect or submission. He took the pen, stared at the bottom of the page. His name was already printed below the formal titles he would no longer be entitled to. He paused, Then, carefully, he wrote, "Received and understood, HCAD." That was it. The moment the past was sealed. And with that, the solicitor handed him one more envelope, embossed with the royal seal. Private, not from Charles, but from someone else entirely. Someone he hadn't heard from in almost 2 years. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was William, and inside, just a single line. No more cameras. Just come. And an address. Not Clarence House. Not Kensington Palace. But a discreet private estate owned by a trusted friend of the family, far from prying eyes, press drones, and microphone booms. Harry folded the note, looked out the window, and said 2 words. Take me there. Because what came next was the meeting no one thought would ever happen. Not on the record. Not in public. No cameras. No staff. Just 2 brothers. And everything unsaid between them.